Buen Camino, Pilgrims. Welcome to our season finale, Season 1, Episode 15. As we close out our first season of the podcast, we're reflecting on what it means as pilgrims to walk these ancient footpaths today, and listening to insights from 4 of this season's guests on the impact of pilgrimage in these modern times.
Walking virtually along the world's most revered footpaths and connecting the global community of pilgrims. It's the Sacred Steps Podcast, available on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Broadcasting from the Shaymare Studios in Florida, here's your host, pilgrim, backpacker, and author, Kevin Donahue.
Buen Camino, Pilgrims. Welcome back to the Sacred Steps Podcast. On this show, we're walking virtually alongside pilgrims and authors, connecting a community of pilgrims from across the globe. I'm Kevin Donahue, pilgrim, backpacker, and author of Sacred Steps, a pilgrimage journal. If you're considering a walking pilgrimage such as the Camino de Santiago, or you've already returned from your journey, you can find all of our episodes streaming on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. And now you can even ask your smart speaker, Siri, Alexa, or Hey Google, to play the Sacred Steps podcast. I hope you'll click subscribe so that our future episodes will download automatically to your device. Over the past 6 months, this podcast has existed in the shadow of the global COVID pandemic. Throughout the world, we've been staying home, remaining distant from one another, which is largely why I started this show, to feel more connected to my pilgrim family and to help anyone who felt the same way I was feeling. So before we begin, let me say a heartfelt thank you to you right now. Thank you for allowing me to walk virtually alongside you. Many of you have taken your time to email me or post reviews on the show on your podcast app, and frankly, I'm very honored. I'm truly touched and humbled and a bit dumbfounded, if I'm being honest. I think that something I may have said resonated with you. If anything, I think it just confirms that we're all one pilgrim family, separated today, but together again in due time soon. Today's episode marks our 15th podcast, the last of season 1. And so on this season finale episode, I wanted to share a few moments from our interviews with pilgrims that connected with me. Moments that you said connected with you. Moments that inspired or prompted reflection on what calls pilgrims to walk these ancient paths, to take these sacred steps in this modern world. As I listened back to our first season episodes over the past few weeks, a few things struck me. First, thankfully, I think the show has gotten a little better since we started, and that is a good thing because those first few episodes were, very rough. So for those of you who have been with us from the very beginning, thank you for staying with us. But beneath all the cringe of just hearing the way your voice sounds on a podcast, I couldn't help but realize that our conversations are filled with hope, filled with promise, filled with an optimism and purpose and a light, filled with all that calls us to pilgrimage. In episode 10, I sat down with Father Johannes Schwarz to discuss his documentary film, Via Alpina Sacra. I had streamed the movie before, and I had actually connected with Father Johannes on several forums and on Reddit, but we had never spoken prior to our interview. So as I do in all of our episodes, I wanted to understand how pilgrimage had impacted his life. As a priest, as a man of faith, I expected it had been important to him, but what he said about being a pilgrim really, really resonated with me.
The word pilgrim comes from the Latin peregrinus, which goes back to basically the one beyond the field. So it means the stranger, the one who is not from here. The idea of pilgrimage is as going to places as a stranger that are somehow connected with your true home, which is sort of the basic idea. That is an ancient Christian thought, and it's fascinating to read old pilgrimage diaries. It's the pilgrim desires to see the places where God has worked or has touched the earth, to see with your own eyes. I think that's a desire that is very human. For me, Jerusalem is, of course, a very special place, and I was, up to that moment, I had done my pilgrimage to Santiago, which was an amazing experience, one in which I had only 3 days of rain. You already can tell I'm a fair weather pilgrim, and I don't mind, even though I don't tan nicely. I just get red, but I prefer the red to the wet, and so Santiago was an amazing experience. The simple life, I mean, is as a pilgrim, one of the things I enjoy most, and which is not so much anymore, because now my whole life is more simple in a way. It's prayer and simple work and manual labor and other things. But it's my life in a hermitage now is very simple. But the beautiful thing of a pilgrimage is that that life becomes simple. It's eat, pray, sleep, walk, repeat. Basically, it's very simple. You have and all the while you leave behind some of the issues that sort of occupy your mind, because you have a physical exhaustion, which helps sometimes the mind to be more quiet. You have engaging conversations, people you meet, especially if you go to Santiago, as many people do. It's one of the most beautiful things of the Camino is the people you meet.
That's Father Johannes Schwarz, and his movie is Via Alpina Sacra. You can find our full interview and links to stream his documentary film in the show notes below. I'm reminded of my own reflections on what it means to be a pilgrim, someone making an act of faith, a journey, as Father Johannes said, seeking the works of God. When I began the Camino de Santiago, as I shared with Sandy Brown in our very first episode, I didn't set out to be a pilgrim.
Yeah, well, thanks. And, frankly, I think if I'm being completely honest, Sandy, I didn't set out to walk a pilgrimage. I think I was one of many on the Camino who was looking for a life experience and maybe a greater connection with what I would call like a quasi-spiritual connection, and a point in my life where this was more of a bucket list thing. And, like you, I grew up in the Methodist Church, but I was a little lapsed, but listening, I think. And I did the Camino Português in 2019 and really didn't expect that I was making a pilgrimage. I thought I was making a life affirming experience with great people and great culture. What I found along the way was a lot of what we carry, right, with us can't be measured in your backpack, right? And as I was walking through and meeting pilgrims and having an opportunity to be in different cities and towns every night and going into different churches, like you said, and finding a connection, I really found more purpose in my Camino and found that there was a true spirituality that resonated with me. And by the time I got to Santiago, and you probably remember some of your first Camino experiences, I was physically broken, I was mentally exhausted, and I was spiritually laid out. And at the end of my journey to the cathedral in Santiago, there was everything that I was walking for that mattered in my life. There was my family that met me at the cathedral, and there was my faith. And, I say in my upcoming book, I was a very reluctant pilgrim, and I think my faith journey is as clouded as many might be. But I really, really didn't set out to become a pilgrim, and I think maybe along the way became one. So.
What I found on the Camino de Santiago, I think, was a deeper and more authentic insight into myself and to my faith. I think Father Johannes was right. The beautiful thing about pilgrimage is that you walk, you eat, you sleep, and you repeat. And that rhythm of the journey, the daily act of just walking, the views and the pilgrim masses and the people that you meet along the way, that gave me the headspace, and quite candidly, it gave me the strength to find my own place as a pilgrim. This desire to seek the places God has touched is nothing new. English author Andy Bull touched on this in our conversation when he retold the history of pilgrimage in the UK.
Well, so there's a couple of things to be said, I suppose, about pilgrimage in the British Isles. And one is that there's a historic context, which is that we had a guy called Henry VIII, you might have heard of, and having previously been defender of the faith and a great friend of the Pope, he fell out with the Pope over marital issues. And essentially, the Reformation came, and Henry and his men and Cromwell went around the country destroying everything they could of what they considered by then religious idolatry. All the pilgrim points, all the shrines, all the places which for centuries and centuries English, Welsh, Scottish people had been going to. And it was a very important part of everyday life. Everyone hoped to go on a pilgrimage of some kind, as today every Muslim will hope to go to Mecca. He wiped it out. From the 1530s, it was illegal. It was illegal to be a Catholic. It was legal to revere the saints. A whole tradition, a whole way of life, a whole important spiritual aspect of the lives of the people of this country were destroyed. And it wasn't really until the 19th century, when a couple of things happened. You had it was no longer illegal to be a Catholic, which was kind of handy because I happen to be a Catholic, so that was good. And it was also that people, all sorts of people, I suppose of all faiths and none, started to think about pilgrimage and to rediscover it. The shrines started to get uncovered. All the remnants were found. Many of the shrines which were destroyed over the last century have been restored. They've been revived. So pilgrimages come back, and it's not just, Catholics are more conscious of it, I think, but Anglicans, people of all faiths and none, the Orthodox Church in this country also. It's a tradition that a lot of us are choosing to reclaim. Whatever we believe, we're choosing to reclaim it.
Andy's book is Pilgrim Pathways from Trailblazer. It's a walking guide to 20 historical footpaths in England, Scotland, and Wales, recalling so much of the rich pilgrimage tradition in the UK. I'll link it in the show notes. Highly, highly, highly recommended. Beautiful book and a great read. By the way, we'll be discussing many of those routes and the tradition of pilgrimage in England with a number of guests in Season 2, which will debut later this summer. It's a bit like the British invasion on the podcast, I think, with guests including Dr. Guy Hayward of the British Pilgrimage Trust, English author Joe Francis Penn, author and performer Bradley Chermside, Irish author Natasha Murda, and another visit with our friend Andy Bull. We're also interviewing several powerful ladies of the Camino, including Amazon.com filmmaker Erin Dooley, and a conversation with Wendy Leonard, who shares her experience for walking the Camino de Santiago as a vegan and how to maintain a vegan lifestyle along the way of St. James. I'm looking forward to sharing with you some really powerful and humbling conversations about the sacrifices that pilgrims make and the obstacles they overcome to complete the Camino de Santiago. Justin Skizik from the film I'll Push You will be joining the podcast to talk about his journey across Spain and his new program to make the Camino more accessible for pilgrims with physical disabilities. An American pilgrim, Brian Stewart, shares his experience overcoming muscular dystrophy on the Camino. It's a really powerful season, and it opened my eyes to just how strong the call of pilgrimage is to so many. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, please do so on Apple Podcast or on YouTube so that our new season, Season 2, downloads automatically to your device. So this intersecting concept of desire to undertake pilgrimage and inaccessibility really hit home with me this year as we were all largely confined due to COVID. When our friend JohnnieWalker from the Facebook groups and from Ivar's Camino forum announced the 2020 We Walk For You Camino, the global response from pilgrims was overwhelming, and to hear John tell it, incredibly humbling. John and Stephen Shields carried the prayers of pilgrims across the entirety of the Camino Frances during COVID.
Well, almost 400 people wrote to us and sent us their prayers, their hopes, their desires, their wishes. It was a huge privilege, actually. And these prayers were about every aspect of the human condition. And so we read them and we prayed and we reflected every morning as we set out, and we stopped at an appropriate point in the day. Many of the prayers were born of grief for pilgrims who have lost loved ones recently and also some time ago, who wanted their dead remembered on this pilgrimage. And as you know, on the Camino Frances, there are little memorials that people have set up to pilgrims who have died, but also to their loved ones. And so high in the mountains in Montes de Oca, we decided that we would set up our own memorial. And we set up a little memorial. We had the shell, we had the data stick with 400 prayers on it, and we dedicated that moment and that place to all of the dead that we'd been asked to pray for, that pilgrims had written to us about. And it was actually a very emotional moment, and it was a great honour to do it, Kevin.
Thank you, John. Such an act of brotherhood, walking prayers across the Camino for others. I'll link John's book, It's About Time, in the show notes. It tells the story of how walking the Camino can change lives and change one's perspective. And it's that transformative power of the Camino that was the topic of my conversation with Australian author Claude Tranchant. Her international bestseller, Boots to Bliss, details a 1,500-mile walk alone across France and Spain at age 64. Following a painful divorce, Claude walked to rediscover herself and to find her strength. Her transformation is such an inspiration to so many. It's an incredible read, and it speaks to how pilgrimage can be a restorative experience for the body, for the mind, and for the soul.
If you have a desire, if your heart tells you to do it, do it. Don't put fear. Fear is normal. I had fear, but overcome your fear. Just do it. You know, Kevin, I do palliative care at the end of life. The lesson I've learned is, when you want to do something, do it. Don't wait. Do it. Fear, you will overcome your fear. And you know, if you have had a difficult life, use your journey for that. Open your heart. Free yourself of your burden. I remember I was in Hornillo del Camino, and we had a meal in the community. And afterwards we went to a mass. They say what you feel about your Camino. And I saw this man crying. I saw their pain. I saw their freedom. They were letting go. And I said, if you have whatever difficulties you had in your life, to allow yourself freely to do this on the Camino, it's a blessing that is given to us.
Claude, I'm so grateful to you for sharing that story. Our discussions this year with authors and pilgrims have taught me that pilgrimage is is an intensely personal experience and very different for each pilgrim. It's physical, metaphysical, spiritual. For some, it's the physical act of faith and devotion. For others, walking is a journey on a known route in search of an unknown destination. But universally, pilgrimage is the hopeful act of setting forth towards something greater. It's truly an optimistic act. And I don't think I had seen the physical act of pilgrimage in that light at all prior to this podcast. Setting aside your daily priorities, letting go, leaving behind the things that are known, leaving behind the things that are possessed, towards something that is unknown, but somehow greater still. Carrying just a few possessions and beginning the journey one step then another. Father Johannes said it best.
Ordering things properly and letting go. The abbot, I think, is right that without God's grace, that may prove to be a difficult task. Yet this letting go may very well begin with putting on your shoes, stepping through the door, starting out and realizing how little you need, and that even those possessions on your back, in essence, are as fleeting as the heat of a summer's day and the rains brought on by dark black clouds. Fleeting is the rain, though a small little pilgrim may at times think it endless and far too abundant.
Thank you so very much for the opportunity to walk virtually alongside each of you. For all that we have overcome, I am hopeful and I am grateful for our journey ahead. Our podcast episodes will be on a brief spring hiatus, returning this summer with more stories of pilgrimage told by those who have left their homes and returned to share their experiences. I'm Kevin Donahue. To you and to those you love, all the best. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and buen camino.
This has been the Sacred Steps Podcast. Visit sacredstepspodcast.com for episode notes, links, or to contact Kevin. Watch us online on YouTube. We read every comment. Please add your review and feedback. Before you go, tap subscribe to have episodes added to your playlist. Until next time, buen camino.